In the scorching red sands of Algeria, on the edge of the Sahara, lies the best example of a Roman veteran colony anywhere. This was an entire city built specifically for veteran soldiers. It tells us a lot about how such colonies look like, and what it was like for the veterans living there. So how did Rome treat its veterans, and what rewards did they get once they finished their military service? Timgad is the best example of a Roman colony because of its perfectly preserved grid plan. This was the typical urban planning model the Romans employed in their colonies. It's orderly, rational, and cookie-cutter. Timgad was founded by the Emperor Trajan in 100 AD. Trajan was the emperor who expanded the Roman Empire to its greatest geographical extent. He is most famous for his wars in Dacia, in modern-day Romania, and his wars against the Parthians, Rome's rival empire to the east. As a soldier himself, he would have understood the importance of rewarding veterans for their service to the empire. I'll tell you more about that later in the video, but first I want to orient you to the site. The square boundary was well defined, with 3 gates and 2 main roads, the Decumanus going east-west and the Carta going north-south, which was typical in many Roman colonies. At Timgad though, the Carta doesn't go all the way through, but terminates at the Forum, where the 2 streets intersect. Every Roman city had a forum, the public square, and every Roman city had a theater as well, so this area in the center of town was the public district where everyone gathered. At the western gate is the Arch of Trajan, a classic Roman triumphal arch, so you really see that Timgad was modeled in the image of Rome. The dimensions are 380 by 330 meters. Walking from the arch, it would take you less than 5 minutes to cross the town, so it wasn't very big. But you can see on Google Earth that the town developed outside its original boundaries once the main square was full. In the southwest corner is a large temple complex dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. It was a very large temple complex for such a small city, and was a symbol of Timgad's allegiance to the Roman state religion and authority. There were also several bathhouses, and even a library, which indicates that learning and culture were esteemed values even here on the edge of the empire. Timgad had all the trappings of a typical Roman city. The library was identified with an inscription saying what it is. It's only one of 2 libraries that survive to us from the Roman world, the other one being in Ephesus. I'll leave a link to one of my Ephesus videos at the end. This Roman urban planning model was standardized and scalable, so it could be replicated anywhere. Kind of like how a McDonald's in Rome looks the same as a McDonald's in New York. Well, with a few exceptions. Another colony founded by Trajan was Colonia Ulpia Traiana in Germany. You can see Trajan in the name. It had a similar formula, with a square shape and grid pattern, although not nearly as well preserved as Timgad. This plan was based on the square military camps called castra. But the colonies were larger, proper towns. This other colony was also in Germany. It eventually became the city of Cologne. Now you know the origin of that city's name. Rome started founding colonies from the moment it began expanding in Italy in the early Republican period. It was a way to settle Roman citizens in the newly conquered territories. Today, many cities in Italy still preserve the Roman grid pattern of the colonies they once were. A few examples include Florence, Bologna, Parma, and Cremona. These were frontier towns when they were founded. So the concept of an urban grid pattern is not modern, but an ancient one. The first colony outside Italy was named Italica, in modern-day Spain, founded during the Second Punic War. The name Italica was not a coincidence. It was a little piece of Italy abroad. You can see the grid pattern here too. Interestingly, Italica was Trajan's hometown, as well as Hadrian's, so our boy Trajan hailed from a colony himself. In the imperial period, the practice of using colonies to settle veterans became more common, because the army in the imperial period was a proper career, so these veterans needed to be taken care of. It was a win-win strategy for Rome. It could use these colonies to maintain a Roman presence in the frontier regions, remind the locals who was in charge, and reward its veterans at the same time. Trajan founded Timgad specifically for veterans of the 3rd Augustan Legion. Not the entire legion was retiring at the same time at Timgad, just the older guys were. A Roman legion had up to 6,000 soldiers. If you were a Roman citizen, you would have been placed in the heavy infantry units, known as the legionaries. If you were not a citizen, it usually meant you came from the provinces, and you were placed in the auxiliary units, which had various specializations like archery, cavalry, and light infantry. These specialized auxiliary units supported the heavy infantry. New recruits signed up for 25 years. It was obviously a hard and dangerous life, and your chance of successfully finishing your 25 years was not high. But if you did make it, and you were lucky enough to retire to the Sunshine State, then this is what you'd get. Full Roman citizenship, to you and your family. That is, if you signed up as a non-citizen. To be a Roman citizen was a big deal, so if you were not, then the army was a good way to achieve this much sought-after status. Of course, they didn't have passports, but you did receive a Roman military diploma, which was a bronze document stating that you were honorably discharged and have been granted Roman citizenship by the emperor. At Timgad, you received a plot of land outside the town in order to farm. I know the area doesn't look like good land to grow anything in, but back then, North Africa was a lot greener and more fertile. You also received land inside the town, where you could build a house. If we look at the map of Timgad again, we can see that there are the public spaces like the forum and theater, and all these equally sized residential lots. These were the lots given to the veterans to build their houses on. I counted 100 of them and measured their size. They're all 20 meters by 20 meters, which was probably too big for a house, so most likely these were apartment blocks with 2 or 3 levels, what the Romans called insulae. Each insula would have housed multiple families, so it's possible that several veterans would team up and build an insula together, then their families shared it. The equally sized lots suggest a fairly egalitarian community, where everyone was more or less equal. Considering how small the town was, I can't imagine a big gap between rich and poor. Also, considering all these guys came out of the military together, where they spent years bonding, that it was a tight community where everyone knew everyone. If you didn't want the farming land and just wanted cold hard cash, then you would have received a lump sum of money that you could invest in a small business. And as a veteran, you were also relieved of paying certain taxes. Considering all those benefits, maybe it was worth it to sign up for 25 years of military service. It was an avenue for social mobility, especially if you came from the lower classes. So after 2 tours in Parthia, 3 tours in Dacia, and maybe 1 in Britannia, you finally got set up in a small town where you knew everyone, out in the provinces and close to nature. You could even learn a new craft. For sure you'd be better off here than in the filth and congestion of Rome. And unlike Rome, the crime rate in Timgad was probably 0. After work, you could spend your afternoons going to the baths, the theater, or the library. Maybe I'm romanticizing it a bit, but an inscription found at Timgad reads in Latin, to hunt, to bathe, to play, to laugh. That is life. It gives the impression that this was a happy place. And these are mosaics also found in Timgad. They are evidence that the city had a lavish urban environment. This mosaic of Neptune dates from the 3rd century, which is when the city peaked. By that point, it developed into something more than just a veteran colony. It became a proper town. Families would have become established and successful from exporting agricultural products to Rome, and from various commercial activities. And economic growth always leads to population growth. And it reached an estimated population of 15,000. But the sweet idyllic life didn't last. And compared to other Roman cities, Timgad's lifespan was relatively short. In the 5th century, the Vandals, a Germanic tribe, invaded the empire and conquered their way all the way down to Iberia, and then into North Africa, where they set up their own Vandal kingdom with Carthage as its capital. In 455, they set sail for Rome and sacked it. Rome had already been sacked by the Goths in 410, which was a much more famous event, but the Vandal sack was actually longer and robbed the city of much more treasure. For 2 weeks straight, they pillaged through the city, destroying buildings and looting valuables. It is said that they also looted the spoils from the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, which had been sitting in Rome for almost 4 centuries. The Vandal sack is where we get the word vandalism, although the term was coined much later, in the French Revolution, by a Frenchman who witnessed the destruction of much artwork during that time. This Frenchman harked back to the Vandal sack, which was one of the last nails in the coffin of the Western Roman Empire. 20 years later, the Western Empire would fall. The Vandals didn't just vandalize Rome, they also vandalized Timgad. Their kingdom in North Africa lasted for 100 years, until 535, when the Byzantine Emperor Justinian sent the brilliant general Belisarius to take back North Africa for the Eastern Romans. This reconquest of North Africa dissolved the Vandalic kingdom, and Timgad experienced a revival, but is a fully Christian city. But the final destruction of the city was when the Arabs conquered North Africa from the Byzantines, around 700 AD. The Arabs probably didn't care much about this isolated place, and didn't bother to build their own city on top. So Timgad became irrelevant, and was abandoned completely by the 8th century. As the region became more and more desertified, Timgad slowly got covered up with sand, which preserved it, and it lay buried and forgotten for 1,000 years. It was discovered in 1765 by a Scottish explorer named James Bruce, but the site only began to get excavated in the 1880s by the French who controlled Algeria, and they excavated it until the 1960s. It's thanks to their work that we have this site available to us today. In 1982, it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a priceless archaeological gem that gives us an invaluable window into what a typical veteran colony looked like. A miniature Rome on the edge of the Sahara.